Okay, it's the witching hour. So let's begin. There are several things that I tried to stress last time in going back over the previous novels that Melville had written. That one of those things that is sustained throughout the novel is the juxtaposition of opposites. In fact, at one point I thought every chapter sort of gainsays or is put against what he said or undermines in some way what he said in the previous chapter. That is not exactly sustained throughout, but it's a rough description of what happens, particularly in the middle chapters. And you should not skip those chapters. When I first started teaching, I had a colleague who tried to help me, fresh out of graduate school, and he gave me the sheet that he handed out to his students. This is what you have to read, and you can skip all that whale stuff in between, the stuff that so instructed the videographer Macy in how to dress and serve a whale. But there's really nothing that is extra. You have to see this book as complete. And it's a very experimental, very different book from the tradition. Think of the arrival of the novel. What was the novel before anybody called it a novel? What were they imitating? What was the form? Well, it was the biography called the history. If you look at the early novels, there's a whole class of these novels, the history of Tom Jones, the history of so-and-so and so-and-so, where you take someone from an early age through to his rise or fall in society at the end. That was one class. Then there were also travel books like Robinson Crusoe, again at the early history of the novel, in which you recounted some adventures. And whatever else those adventures conveyed, it was basically the notion of exposing someone to a different locale, to expand the reader's knowledge, to satisfy his curiosity about how one might behave in certain strange circumstances or the like. Then there was a third class of novels, which were romantic novels. Some of you may be English majors and had to suffer through one of the early novels of Samuel Richardson. Certainly, if you have short of immortality, it's a waste of time if you're interested in good writing or an interesting story. But anyway, but Melville breaks with that. We are in the middle of the 19th century. The novel has been going for about 150 years, but he creates a novel, I think I alluded to this last time, in which the narrator comes out, announces himself, and we have a recounting of how he gets onto the whaling ship. That's the first part of the novel. And the chief character is the protagonist, is the fellow who is telling us about what he does. And then what happens? He disappears. He is a voice, he describes things, but he takes part in no action which advances the novel. He is not a protagonist, the one who moves the agon or the struggle, the conflict on to an ending. So we start off with a narrator, then we move to a description of how a group of men interrelate, the relationship between the crew and its captain, and observations about the world that they inhabit. Lots of descriptions about how one goes about the craft of whaling, how one behaves in regard to one's crew members, and so forth. This is not something that's just stuck in there to make it a longer book. Melville was not paid by the word. This is part of his plan. And again, if you look at his earlier novels, you will see you will see instances of exactly that. And then what happens? Then suddenly, Ahab, who's been introduced in terms of his relationship to the crew as captain to crew, and that's sort of a recurrent theme through those chapters, suddenly he becomes the chief mover, the chief agent, the one who is doing things, who makes the decisions that will affect the novel's conclusion, that will bring the novel to conclusion. It's all very carefully planned. I mean, as I said last time, this theory or this hypothesis that Melville started off writing a very different novel and then writing to his publisher and saying, you'll have a finished draft in December. This was, I think, in April or May that he wrote the letter. And then it's not there in December. Well, what is he doing? Well, there's one theory that he's having an affair with a woman down the road, but there's no support for that whatsoever. It's complete conjecture. What's he doing? Well, he's finishing writing Moby Dick. And I think that if you look at the book carefully, you see that it is planned, very carefully planned. The first words, as we said last time, were call me Ishmael. And I mentioned what that referred to, that it's a reference to the biblical story of Ishmael, right? Who was the son of Abraham, right? Abraham has been promised that he will be the founder of a great race, right? And then the story goes, of course, that Sarah cannot bear him a child, and she says, and this was quite within Hebraic law at the time, if your handmaid is available, have her bear the child, a sort of surrogate parency, and that's like your child. It's like your child. And that child can inherit your money and so forth and so forth. And that child is Ishmael. But then lo and behold, Sarah gives birth to Isaac, and Ishmael's out the door because he's not natural issue. And so, the natural question which occurs to Melville and should occur to you as readers is, this is an injustice. Ishmael is treated as an orphan, someone who's cut off from his father. And I mentioned last time how this is related to Melville's own biographical experience when his father died when he was a child, leaving him alone in the world, at least to figure the world out. And this is a recurrent theme in the earlier novels. It continues in the novels that follow Moby Dick. It's the chief element, one of the chief elements, in the novel Pierre, which is very difficult to read, yet very instructive. It's a disaster. Maybe not as much of a disaster from a reader's point of view as Marty, but nevertheless, a fascinating disaster. It's incidentally, it is subtitled The Ambiguities, which is a continuation of this doubleness that Melville gives us so prominently in Moby Dick and in the previous novels. But there's another reason to say, call me Ishmael. And that is that this is Melville speaking through his mouthpiece. I, Herman Melville, am like Ishmael. And in his philosophizing, in his musings about the nature of life that go throughout the book, Ishmael is really his mouthpiece. So that's, call me Ishmael, this is my front man, as it were. This is the mask through which I speak to you, reader, and through which the events of this work are really organized. But it's also important for another reason, and that is to the ending of the book, right? Ishmael is an outcast. What happens at the end? What closes the book? The part that was left out of the British edition, which was called The Whale. And that is where we have the epilogue, in the epilogue, where Ishmael survives. He's the lone survivor. And the question to ask is, why? Why is this character the survivor? What does he represent that Melville is underscoring, is approving of? Again and again, Melville reflects in this account that we can't be certain of anything. And he is not giving us a certain lesson, behave this way. Man is caught, as he says in one of the sentences, he is caught in the maw between opposite qualities. And there is no way he can be certain of which way, literally, to jump. And this is made clear through the figure who is opposite Ahab, who is not really Ishmael in a way, or at least in one way. And that is, Ahab is the seat, the representative of power. He is the captain of the boat. compared to the Lord himself, right? And Melville reflects on this. Just as the Lord is over us on earth, I'm paraphrasing, but not very much, maybe a word or two. This is the Lord is over us on earth, so is the captain over us on shipboard. And that's an important element to bear in mind. In the last novel that Melville writes, which is not published in his lifetime, it is a fascinating work, and I recommend it to you highly, which is Billy Budd, for Topman. Billy does something that he shouldn't do, but that is a natural response. He is, and this is often shown in Melville, where we have someone who is ostensibly, or in every way we can judge, good, who is confronted by someone who is evil. This is played out in the Town Ho story, which is an important work, incidentally. It was first published to advertise Moby Dick, and was in a nugatory way what this book is about, right? And so in Billy Budd, Claggart, who doesn't like Billy for no good reason, does something that causes Billy to react. And Billy lashes out and hits him. And as a result of that, Claggart falls to the ground and dies, cracks his skull and dies. Well, what is Captain Vere, interesting name, V-E-R-E, Truth, to do? And although he loves Billy, he condemns him to death. And at the end, we see Billy hanging from the yardarm. He has no erection, which is the usual anatomical response to being hanged. He has no erection. The allusions are to Jesus and to the crucifixion. Billy's last words before he falls through the door are, "God bless Captain Vere." So that Melville recognizes again and again, though this world may be run by fools, by poltroons, by people who don't deserve their place in society, nevertheless, this is the way it is. And you can't just say, well, I don't like it, because this is the way Melville sees society is operating. And if you don't have that society, if you don't have hierarchy, if you don't have order, man falls into chaos. Lamentably true. Okay. So let's see how this idea is traced a bit. I finished last time with a chapter, or talking about a chapter called The Sermon, where Father Mapple speaks to his congregation, right? And I remember when I first read this novel, and completely, I think it was in 1956, I said, oh, I see what he's doing here. Everybody else sort of sees the same thing. This is foreshadowing of Ahab. And the story of Jonah presents Jonah as a kind of Ahab. It took me years to realize that this is not true. That Jonah does exactly the opposite of what Ahab does. Jonah wants to escape God. He doesn't like God, and so he's going to sail beyond the realm of God, beyond the kingdom of God. And of course, he fails to do that. The crew is made very unhappy by the presence of this fellow who dares deny God. And they see their problems as all issuing from that, so they throw him overboard. And what happens? A whale comes along and swallows him, And then Jonah has a vision of how he's supposed to behave, and lo and behold, the whale vomits him forth, and he now accepts God completely. This is the opposite of what Ahab does. Ahab does not sail away from God to escape God. He wants to confront God. He wants to be on an equal par with God. He wants God to recognize him as being made of the same stuff as God himself. And that's said in a number of different ways, in a number of different times. Okay. Incidentally, Ahab too is mentioned very briefly. We know that he too is an orphan. That orphan motif represents the position of human beings in society. God does not give us a blueprint. God does not say, here's the way you should behave, and the result will be thus and so. You will be given heaven or whatever as a result of behaving this way. That life means confronting ambiguities, and you can never, according to Melville, this is repeated again and again, and in the novel Pierre, which follows this, Pierre does everything in terms of good conscience. He thinks his father has fathered a child. So now why should Pierre have all the privileges of society? And this poor woman, this poor girl that he has sired, whose father was strayed into marriage, why should she be treated so unjustly by fate? And so he tries to fix things so that she will get her share of the inheritance, so that this will be solved equitably. And as a result, there's a complete catastrophe. Everything he has assumed turns out to be the wrong inference, and he comes to a disastrous conclusion. So again, that idea is very strong in Melville. Okay, now let me go back to the sermon itself, where Father Mapple talks about what one must have in life. And that is in, let's see, the chapter, excuse me, one moment. I have that marked. Page 48 in my copy. Okay, here is Mapple. What has Mapple done before giving this sermon? He has retreated to a pulpit, and very carefully he has lifted the ropes, which are like the ropes on a ship. He has lifted them so he is cut off from his congregation. He is an isolato, one of Melville's favorite words, a man who's isolated from society. And he preaches. What does he preach? That man must have faith, complete faith. And just as last time I pointed out the quotation from Marty, in which Babbalanja, the philosopher, says that once you lose your faith, once you lose innocence, once you become conscious of the possibility that something is not so or can be explained in a different way, you're lost. And that's exactly what he comes to. So he finishes his talk. Woe to him whom this world charms from gospel duty. Woe to him who seeks to pour oil upon the waters when God has brewed them into a gale. Woe is him who tries to pour oil on waters when God has been responsible for the turbulence. Woe to him who seeks to please rather than to appall. Woe to him whose good name is more to him than goodness. Woe to him who in this world courts not dishonor. Who in this world courts not dishonor. You must be willing to risk everything if you are of perfect faith. Woe to him who would not be true, even though to be false were salvation. Yes, yea. Woe to him who in the great pilot, as the great pilot Paul has it, while preaching to others is himself a castaway. Okay, he drooped and fell away from himself for a moment, then lifting his face to them again, showed a very deep joy in his eyes as he cried out with a heavenly enthusiasm. But oh, shipmates, on the starboard hand of every woe there is a pure delight, and higher the top of that delight than the bottom of the woe is deep. Is not the main truck higher than the keelson is low? Delight to him, a far, far upward and toward delight, can't see very well, who against the proud gods and commodores of this earth even stands forth his own inexorable self. Delight is to him whose strong arms yet support him when the ship of this base, treacherous world has gone down beneath him. The light is to him who gives no quarter to the truth, and kills, burns, and destroys all. So though he pluck it out from under the robes of senators and judges, delight, top gallant delight is to him who acknowledges no law or Lord, but the Lord, the God, and is only a patriot to heaven. But in saying this, what happens? O Father, he says, known chiefly to me by thy rod, mortal or immortal, here I die. I have striven to be thine, more than to be the world's or mine own. Yet this is nothing. I leave eternity to thee. For what is man that he should live out the lifetime of his God? He finishes the sermon. He said no more, but slowly waving a benediction, covered his face with his hands, and so remained kneeling till all the people had departed, and he was left alone in the place. That's the key word, alone. If you follow that path that he has prescribed, right, and retain the slightest doubt, the moment you question this faith that you have, you are lost. Faith must be complete. Of course, on the other pole is our desire for freedom. And that is what Ahab seeks, which of course would ruin society. And in fact, the symbol of society, the ship, is lost at the end. And there are people who say, oh, Ahab is an evil person. Why? Because he's selfish. He wants to satisfy his own vengeance and doesn't care that everybody else will be killed. That is not true. He has a great deal of concern. If you remember, those of you who read the book recently, near the end, he tells Pip, don't follow me. He wants Pip to be saved. He recognizes, he loves Pip. Pip represents that innocence, that complete faith that Ahab himself has lost. Don't follow me. And Pip says no, he's not going to do that. He will give himself to Ahab. As a result, he is killed. Remember what happens when Pip lowers for a whale, and he is given instructions on how to behave. You know, if a whale comes at you, do this. You know, above all, I've forgotten the order in which these things are said, but above all, do not leave the ship. And you know, he follows it, and it's the wrong decision. And then it happens again, and he does the opposite, and he's told the opposite. Above all, you must, leave the ship, or whatever it is. The opposite. So there's no rule, there's no instruction which will bring salvation, which will bring, somehow surviving the ambiguities of the world. And that's a very powerful thought in Melville, which comes back again and again and again, that we are all lost. We cannot control our destiny. And this is what Ahab rises up to challenge. Okay. As we're about to leave, incidentally, the name Ahab, what does that represent? Any Bible readers here? Okay.
Wasn't there a king in the Bible who
Yes.
was not eaten by sharks but dogs?
Did the dogs lick?
Yes, the dogs licked his blood, right? And what did he do? What had he done that he meets that fate? He allows his people, for the sake of his own power, to worship Baal. And for the sake of earthly power, he allows this to happen. And who leads him in that direction? Always a woman. Jezebel, it was you. His wife Jezebel. How easily one can be swayed by earthly desires. And that too you find in a number of recurrent ways. Okay. I want to pay particular attention. I'm sorry, and that of course is linked to the story of Elijah. that Elijah warns him, against this following this path of being an apostate, of supporting Baal. And Elijah is warning the people who are about to board the Pequod, which, as you know, well, at least Melville thought the tribe was extinct, which fits in with the idea of everybody on the ship dying. Actually, it wasn't extinct, and the Pequods, spelled with a T, not a D, have enjoyed a very prosperous 21st century, running the casinos down in Connecticut. Okay, that's a simple fact. This first section of the book, which concentrates on Ishmael, sort of, I won't say definitely ends, but peters out or slopes down in the chapter, The Lee Shore. And I don't know if any of you remember that. It's again one of those parts of the book which has encouraged people to say, oh, Melville meant to write a different book. But I don't think that's true. He talks about this fellow named Bulkington, and he promises that Bulkington will play a role later on. He's met Bulkington once before in this novel in New Bedford, and he's telling us that something important will happen. Excuse me, let me get to the right page here. Page 106. I should have put markers in here. Okay, so some chapters back, when Bulkington was spoken of, a tall, new-landed mariner encountered in New Bedford at the inn. All right, what does he do? How do we see him? This is what he represents. The port would fain give succor. The port is pitiful. In the port is safety, comfort, hearthstone, supper, warm blankets, friends, all that's kind to our mortalities. But in that gale that is life itself, the port, the land, is that ship's direst jeopardy. She must fly, that ship, must fly all hospitality. One touch of land, though it but graze the keel, would make her shudder through and through. With all her might, she crowds all sail offshore. In so doing, fights gainst the very winds that fain would blow her homeward. Seeks all the lashed sea's landlessness again, for refuge's sake, forlornly rushing into peril. Her only friend is her bitterest foe. Okay? Know ye now, Bulkington? He's the one who understands this. Glimpses do ye seem to see of that forgive me, I don't have my glasses, are his somewhere. Glimpses do you see of that morally intolerable truth, that all deep, earnest thinking is but the intrepid effort of the soul to keep the open independence of her sea. But in that independence, man runs a great risk. But it is that risk which gives meaning to life, even though we're doomed finally to lose. While the wildest winds of heaven and earth conspire to cast her on the treacherous, slavish shore. But as in landlessness alone resides the highest truth, shoreless, indefinite as God. And think of this again in terms of what Ahab is doing, right? He is looking for that highest truth and is willing to risk everything for it. So better is it to perish in that howling infinite than to be ingloriously dashed upon the lee. Even if that were safety, she says it is not. For worm-like then, who would crave and crawl to land? It's in the nature of man in his highest aspiration to seek that landlessness in which lies the answers. Terrors of the terrible, all this agony so vain, take heart. Take heart, O Bulkington, bear thee grimly, demigod, up from the spray of thy ocean perishing. Straight up leaps thy apotheosis. And that is the whale, but it is also Ahab. And there is that linkage. There is a linkage of these various protagonists throughout the novel. Just as Ahab is linked to Pip, Ahab is linked to Ishmael, and the beginning of the novel is linked to the end. Right? Ishmael, call me Ishmael, who's going to go on this journey. Ishmael is the orphan. At the end, what happens? They encounter the Rachel, which they've encountered before, and the Rachel is now looking for her children. Did Rachel have children? Oh, a lot of Bible thumpers here. No. Rachel, as you remember, was the desired woman of Jacob. And Laban, the father of these two girls, Leah and Rachel, said, you must work for me and I'll give you Rachel. And Jacob works for Laban for 7 years. And what happens? The father pulls a switch, switching a bait and switch, and Jacob winds up sleeping with Leah, and Leah becomes his wife. So he's got to work another 7 years to get Rachel. And Laban's a very shrewd character in these terms. But Leah sort of wins the victory despite this. Because Leah has children by Jacob, but Rachel does not. And so what we see until later on, when God sees the suffering of these people that they have willingly taken on and gives Rachel a child who is Joseph. You know the story of Joseph, I hope. So that's the compensation that she gets. But Rachel is weeping for her children. She's jealous. She feels this lack in her life. She approaches God and says, why have you left me barren? This is not fair. Again, this theme of justice that runs throughout Moby Dick. The injustice of the Rachel not having the children, trying to find the children, that is the Ishmaels and the others on this boat, and bring them to her. And of course she fails. So that there is that relationship between the Ishmael that we first meet in the first sentence of the book, and the very ending of the book, which is when Ahab really finally crosses the line, because the Rachel is looking for, the son of the captain, and in that most earnest, most desperate of human needs to preserve your son, your child, and he asks Ahab to help him in this search. What does Ahab do? He turns his back. He says no to humanity. And the reason that Ishmael survives is that throughout he has said yes to humanity. That ultimately, in not knowing anything other than, as again we have seen before in a previous novel, that in righteousness alone can we believe. That everything else is subject to doubt. And so even if righteousness is not the path, that is what we feel impelled to do simply because makes more sense, it is better than anything else. Ishmael, we see again and again, chooses brotherhood. And this is most conspicuous, of course, in his relationship with Queequeg. He has met him back in the port, and they have formed a fraternal bond. Now, there is a whole school of people, a slew of people, who want to insist that this is a sign of homosexuality in a novel. It makes no sense to me at all, because if, let's say it were, it doesn't add anything to the design. Why would Melville do that? I mean, it doesn't fit in terms of the interpretation of the novel. But he comes back to this idea later on of Ahab and Queequeg being married. Thus are we married. We've talked about the monkey rope, the custom on the Pequod to make sure that we are mindful that a mistake on our part will doom somebody else. So that even if this causes the death of both parties, we have to respect this by honor and tradition, those two words, on the Pequod, that the monkey rope operates, that we are inextricably, as human beings, bound to each other. We see this back in the first night that Ishmael and Queequeg sleep together, and they're talked about as a married couple. But it's not a sexual marriage, it's the sense of our all, and it's repeated too many times to be just, my interpretation. It's repeated over and over again that our other human beings are like parts of ourselves. Ishmael talks about an experience in his childhood, when I mentioned this last time, when he fell asleep and his arm went to sleep, and he thought it was somebody else's arm. And then he realizes that it's his own arm. And he says, well, Queequeg is like that arm. It's our limited consciousness or sensibility that sees this as other. But that ultimately we are all intertwined. And that which permits us to be who we are, this is Melville, is other people and our engagement with other people. That's one of the reasons, too, why so much emphasis is placed upon men working and how they go about their duties on board the ship. Melville thinks that this is important. Remember, in complete freedom, he says, in complete freedom, there is purposelessness. It may be a blissful existence, but it's an existence which has no meaning. Even if the most wonderful things that can happen to you occur in endless succession, that is not living for a discernible purpose. But if we act in society in which we're all interlocked, then we can gain some sense of who we are, of who we are as human beings. And that's basically true. We're informed so much by society. The idea of the ship as society is stated both explicitly and implicitly over and over again. We refer to the Pequod and to her crew as being like Anacharsis Klutz. I don't know if that's Anacharsis or Anacharsis. Can anybody tell me on that? You know who he was? He was a Prussian nobleman who believed in the rights of man. And he went to Paris during the Revolution and offered his theses about the rights of man. And he had a deputation of people from all over Europe, indeed not only from Europe, but also from Africa, and I think there were even some Asians in that deputation. He really believed that the time of nationalism was over and we had to enjoy and celebrate our humanity. And he was something of a pain in the ass to the people who were running the revolution, and finally he's killed for that. And there's a sense in which Ahab is like Anacharsis Klutz, because he also is killed for his defense of humanity. He is the spokesman for mankind in his confrontation with whether it is God or the nothingness that is behind the concept of God. Whatever it is, he wants an explanation. He wants to be told. Okay, this idea of the ship as being society. Immediately, chapter 26, after this first part, this is the break. Immediately, we are introduced to the knights and squires. These are representative of different parts of humanity, right? Starbuck, what does he represent? He's the reasonable man. He's the man of reason and moderation. And yet, again and again, we are told that that very reason limits him in his capacity to oppose what Ahab is doing and what Ahab has done. And it's very explicitly stated late in the book when he confronts Ahab, and he knows that they are going to be doomed if they follow this madman who is madness maddened, again because of the nature of man's situation in the scheme of things. He knows that we're going to be doomed, that that ship is going to perish. And Starbuck himself, nevertheless, he cannot rise up and mutiny. He cannot lead an insurrection. And this too is rooted not only in the early novels, but in Melville's own experience, particularly in Umo, which is his second. But it recurs, that idea of mutiny. And again, like it or not, this is the way we are composed as social animals. If Donald Trump, in his infinite wisdom, because he was, of course, first in his class at Wharton, if Donald Trump takes us to war, we all suffered. We all suffer for it. And that's simply the way it is. And that's a motif, that, again, that Melville reiterates, not just in Moby Dick, but elsewhere as well. Okay, so we have the knights and squires. That is, those who serve the power of this champion of humanity. And we have Starbuck, who is reason. Then we have Stubb. What does Stubb represent? Stubb represents mankind in his jollity and is not looking past it today. Stubb wants to enjoy life as it comes at him. And he is not above tricking his fellow man. Remember what he does with the ambergris. He cheats the Jungfrau, the virgin, and he has no conscience about it. That's the competitiveness of mankind. One man trying to profit by his superior trickery or nonsense, or capacity of understanding something over another. Don't let me go on too long. I know last time I put a strain on some people's bladders by going over the halfway point, so remind me of that. All right, so we have Ahab, we have Starbuck, we have Stubb and his jollity, this man who's a good businessman, like Bildad and Peleg, who play their little game, good cop, bad cop, in order to get Queequeg and certainly Ishmael at the highest lay possible. And then we have Flask. And Flask is vicious, he's completely mindless, and he's also a creature of pleasure. He doesn't care. All he wants to do is watch his NFL football game on Sunday and enjoy whatever life will bring to him. Each of these knights has a correspondent among people of color. And it's interesting. We have Queequeg, who's the natural man aligned with Starbuck. He is the pagan representation of what we in Western society celebrate in Starbuck. And then we have Tashtigo, who was Stubbs. And he too has this counter position to Stubbs' jollity. And then the third is Dagu, and Dagu is referred to as Ahasuerus. Melville gives us lots of biblical names. He makes lots of references. He's an amazingly well-read guy. And what's so astonishing is that much of this he got in high school at Albany Academy in New York, where he was interrupted because of family finances, but spent a total of a little less than 2 years. And one of the courses he took, I'd love to get a syllabus for that course, was Hebrew mythology. So who was, or Hebrew legend, so who was Ahasuerus in that? Anybody remember? No? Ahasuerus, according to legend, this is not in the Bible, was the man whom Jesus, on the way to the cross, stops and asks for a drink of water. And Ahasuerus says no. And so for that, he is punished to be the wandering Jew. Now, there are various versions of this story, but this was the version that was most popular, most generally spread, certainly in the early 19th century. Okay, we go through that lineup, and very carefully laid out. These are representative men on this representation of society. And whom does it all come down to in the end but Pip, this central character. I had a colleague when I was teaching who had some crazy ideas, but he was also, you could always rely on him to give you a different interpretation of something. And he once said, the real protagonist of Moby Dick is Pip. And I thought, aha, he's on to something. Let me tease him out. Let's see. And he never gave me the answer as to why. But you can see, it's not that Pip is a protagonist, but it is, in a sense, in Pip's name that this protest against the absurdity of the universe is launched by Ahab. So far from being this evil man, he's quite different. He is, and this is laid out in some length near the end of the quest. That in a sense he is doing this as the spokesman for the child who does not have the answer, for whom who when he looks for an instruction gets counter instructions and is blamed for the bad results in both of the possibilities. Okay. Now, if in talking about Ahab, you're struck by certain resemblances to Jesus, that's not accidental. The crucifixion motif is constant throughout the book. And you will see repetitions of the number 3 in the town host story, for example. We have Steelkilt, who's in the hold for 3 days, like being in the tomb before he comes out. And the chase for 3 days, and so forth and so forth. Melville has crucifixion very much in his mind, and of course, in his last novel, after having written Clarel, A Journey to the Holy Land, after having written that long poem, he writes Billy Budd, and there too is a figure clearly alluded to as a Jesus figure of innocence. Okay, what is it now? 8 o'clock? You want to take a break now? Okay, let's break for about 5 minutes.
5 minutes.
Thank you. All right, that's a good place. 159. So I said that no character represents absolute truth. No character, because there is, according to Melville, there is no such thing. There's a danger that Ishmael recognizes in his position as well. And that becomes clear when Ishmael talks about climbing on the masthead, climbing up to the sails. And so this almost happened to Melville too, where he got caught in the furling of the sails and almost plunged into the sea. So he incorporates that into this novel. That if you stare too long into your own image, like Narcissus, that you also cut yourself off from humanity, and you risk drowning, falling into yourself, into that self which excludes others, which excludes the recognition that we are all intertwined, that we are all brothers. There's a chapter which I've never really been that secure in my interpretation of it. Maybe you have a better idea. And that is where, before the voyage starts, Stubb has a dream. The chapter is called Queen Mab. And that, of course, comes from the fairy queen. And the illusion is Queen Mab brings to men in dreams what they deserve. And here is the answer to Stubb's approach to life. He kicks the pyramid, and the pyramid points to the heavens, and this is very much like Ahab rising in protest. And then someone, a merman, creature of the sea, a spokesman for life, the energies of life, grabs him and says, why are you doing that? Stops him. And when he turns around, his rump is covered by marlin spikes, all pointing outward. So if you're going to kick him, you're going to injure yourself. And that it seems to me to indicate that Melville is saying that, talking about the risk in protesting against God's ways, which are finally inscrutable. Again, faith must be complete, but who can have a complete faith? Even Father Mapple, who devotes his life to being, apart from the crew and having complete faith in God, has a doubt. And the minute that doubt enters, he's doomed. Remember, we talked about Yilla and Marty. Babylanja tells Tomo, because Tomo was looking for Yilla, this golden-haired representation of ideality, of innocence, of non-carnal sex. Non-carnal in a sense, not the sense that she's not sexual, but that there's no sin involved in her very conception. That as a woman, she can appeal to him totally without any possibility of guilt or harm. And Babylanja says, once you have lost Yilla, and you have lost her, you can never find her. So your search for Yilla is doomed. It is impossible. And in a way, Ahab's search for absolute truth is doomed. Let's see. I'd like to move ahead to a critical point in the novel, in the chapter called The Quarterdeck. Let me refer to that directly, because there are some passages in there that are really critical to the progress of the novel. 164. Okay. Okay. Well, I was going to use your glasses, right? So I could read better. Let's try it. Vengeance on a dumb brute, cried Starbuck, that simply smote thee from blindest instinct. This is the man of reason, rationality, who sees things in rational, explainable terms. Madness. To be enraged with a dumb thing, Captain Ahab, seems blasphemous. But of course, Starbuck does not understand the nature of Ahab's quest. It is not that Ahab wishes to have revenge against a dumb brute, but what that dumb brute stands for. Remember, at one point in the novel, someone says, why are you seeking out Moby Dick? He wasn't even the whale that took your leg. And Ahab answers, yes, he was. Well, maybe not the particular whale, but it represents the injustice that Melville sees Ahab as not feeling at all guilty for his confrontation with whatever would speak to and explain and justify the universe. And so this animal, this creature, this most magnificent creature in creation of whatever that underlying force is in the universe, he is doomed to do that. He will not relent. Ahab will be a Democrat to all above and all beyond. There's a lot of transcendental Neoplatonism in this novel. The idea that the world as we experience it is simply the surface of a truth which lies behind it. And so we want constantly, it's not.
Your microphone, Frank.
Yeah, Mike,
What happened to my microphone? Okay.
it takes a valuable, I don't have one.
All right. This is a key moment. Okay. This is a key moment in the novel. Okay. Hark ye yet. Oh, we'll have to.
We can hear you, Frank. Keep going. Yeah.
Okay. Hark ye yet again, the little lower layer. All visible objects, man, are but as pasteboard masks. Very much a 19th century concept thought. But in each event, in the living act, The undoubted deed, there, some unknown but still reasoning thing puts forth the moldings of its features from behind the unreasoning mask. If man will strike through the mask, how can the prisoner, note that word, prisoner, and Ahab wanting to break out of that prison, how can the prisoner reach outside except by thrusting through the wall that we're all confined in? You know, he talks about man being like a goldfish in a bowl. No matter how big the bowl, we're still confined. That all living creatures are like the goldfish in the bowl. Thrust through the wall. To me, the white whale is that wall, represents the idea of the wall, the limitation on my knowledge, the limitation on my ability, who is made of the same stuff as whatever is behind the pasteboard mask, that must be yielding at some point to reason, because that's the faculty we have in common, or else all is chaos and all is lost and all is absurdity, and it makes no sense at all. Sometimes I think that there's naught behind, that there is no God, that there's no reason, that all this is purely accidental, that all this is meaningless, so then why live? But 'tis enough. He tasks me, whatever this is, and he uses the pronoun here referring to Moby Dick. He heaps me. I see in him outrageous strength, with an inscrutable malice sinnowing it. That inscrutable thing is chiefly what I hate. And be the white whale agent of whatever this power may be, or be the white whale principal, I will wreak that hate upon him. Talk not to me of blasphemy, man. I'd strike the sun if it insulted me. So characteristic of Ahab, the pride of the man. He's very much like Milton's Satan, isn't he? Which, incidentally, Melville read and liked very much. I'd strike the sun if he insulted me, for could the sun do that, then I could do the other. Since there is never a sort of fair play herein, jealousy presiding over all creation. But not my master man is even that fair play. Who's over me? Truth hath no confines, take off thine eye, more intolerable than fiends, glarings and a doltish stare. That's what the reason is reduced to. So, thou reddenest and palest, my heat has melted thee to anger glow. But look ye, Starbuck, what is said in heat, now he's changing, so oh my God, I've gone too far, this guy can't comprehend this, and he is a key to my pursuing the whale on this journey. And he's, what is said in heat, he's in heat now, not that kind of heat, but in anger. That thing unsays itself. There are men from whom warm words are but small indignity. I meant not to incense thee. Let it go, let it go. Look, see yonder Turkish cheeks of spotted dawn, living, breathing pictures painted by the sun. The pagan leopards, the unreeking and unworshipping things that live and seek and give no reasons for the torrid life they feel, whereas he demands reasons. The crew, are they not one and all with Ahab in this matter of the whale? And that's something that we have to see again and again in the course of this telling of, in this middle part. If the crew is with Ahab, for whatever reason, and there's a variety of reasons, are they not one and all with Ahab in this matter of the whale? See Stubb, he laughs. See yonder Chilean, he snorts to think of it. Stand up amid the general hurricane. That one-tossed sapling cannot Starbuck. And what is it? Reckon it. 'Tis but to strike a fin. No wondrous feat for Starbuck. And the striking a fin is alluded to in another part of the book with the chasing of the finback whale. The Jungfrau, the Virgin. Remember that ship? And there's a nice pairing there. The Virgin has no sperm, obvious reasons, right? And then he meets the Bachelor. The Bachelor has too much sperm, and they're going back to port. And the different responses of these two And Ahab has to try to negotiate in his own mind what this means. What is it more from this one poor hunt then, the best lance out of all Nantucket? Surely he will not hang back when every foremost hand has clutched a whetstone. Ah, con straining sees thee, I see. The billow lifts her. Speak! Shoot! Shot from my dilated nostrils. He has inhaled it in his lungs. That is what Ahab has breathed out. That there's a portion of Starbuck now which has inhaled exactly the argument, exactly the position that Ahab has. Every character who represents what seems a total position partakes somewhat of the position of the one who opposes him or who sees it differently. Starbuck now is mine, cannot oppose me without rebellion. And the one thing he cannot do is rebel. He cannot mutiny. And his very reason is what undercuts him and makes him impotent in that regard. Then in chapter 37, again in reference to, I don't need to read this, in reference to Ahab's position, and this is something I noticed the first time I read the book, and I brought it up with my professor. And that's the first time anyone ever told me I should think about going to graduate school. And I remembered having seen an Italian movie about the Iron Crown of Lombardy. There's reference to the Iron Crown of Lombardy here. The Iron Crown of Lombardy was supposedly made from a spike in the cross on which Jesus died. And there was an actual Iron Crown of Lombardy, not iron as it was thought. But anyway, that's besides the point. And it was believed that this crown would represent it in symbolic way man's search for justice, and that when it was taken across an unjust land, that it would sink into the ground. At least that's one of the legends of it. And so when Ahab is reflecting and says, "What is this iron crown of Lombardy that presses upon my brow?" What he is saying is that this obligation as the champion of mankind is to locate, to do his fight, to perform his fight for justice. And that, again, is a very persistent theme in Melville. Justice, justice, justice. That this is an unjust universe, and we can't do anything about it except wonder and try to rebel against it. Okay. All right. Again, you can skip many of those chapters about the crew, the people at work. But I think you do so to your disadvantage. You are missing some very important aspects of the novel. Melville gives us men at work. He starts with physical objects, but the mind of Ishmael is always looking for analogies, always interpreting these things as symbols, that everything we do is in some way a reflection of our place and our conundrum in the universe. The mat maker is one example of this. Are we free or are we bound? Do we have free will or do we not? And in the mat maker, the making of the mat is compared to the living of a life. And he explains each part of the operation in terms of a further truth. And so the shuttle represents free will, the warp and woof of the loom represents necessity, and we seek to create a life with these two elements, which really sort of fight against each other in their position. Okay. Melville is not beyond some pretty bad jokes every once in a while, but I suppose if you write the greatest novel, the greatest work of fiction, in American history, you can be entitled to that. He talks, for example, about the work on the boat, the Speck-Snyder, who reduces the whale and what the whale represents to Bible leaves. Interesting analogy there. Those Bible leaves, those very slim slices of whale, are then rendered for fat. And he said that the man who was in charge of this operation wears as his apron the foreskin of a whale. And so he speaks of him as being, fit for the archbishopric. That's a pretty bad joke. So he occasionally does this sort of thing. And when he talks about heads or tails, that there are two fish. Of course, the whale is not really a fish, but anyway, considered a fish for the purpose of distribution of what goes to the royal family, that the king gets the head and the queen gets a tail. And he plays with that, the fact that, isn't there something odd about that the queen gets the tail? And it's said that the rationale for this, according to a great lawyer, his name is Prynne, that the reason for this is that the queen wants whalebone for her stays, for her girdle or corset or whatever, but then tells us that this is actually factually incorrect, and it's not. So, sort of casting doubt on that and talking about the queen as being motivated by her desire for tail. You make of that what you will. This is not Melville at his best, I would say. It's cheap stuff. Okay. Then we have another crucial point in this section of the novel is when Ahab nails a doubloon to the mast. And he has now gotten everyone on the ship to agree to his chief reason for the pursuit of the whale instead of it being a typical whaling voyage. And one by one, the members of the crew come up and look at this doubloon that he has nailed onto the mast and interprets what he sees on it in terms of his own character and view of the world. And finally, the one who has the final say in this is Pip. And Pip says, I look, he looks. I look, you look, he looks. In other words, each of us interprets the symbol of the roundness, the wholeness, the globe of the world in his own way, according to his own experience. And then we have Ahab who steps up and says, I am going to claim this doubloon, because I, in a sense, want the world. That, given my position as this grand champion of mankind, I want to be beyond everyone else, beyond society. I am their leader. They should see me as their champion. And he says, what happens? This is, again, another joke, and I think this one works, is asked, what do we do? What happens if, he said, Ahab said, this is the gold screw that holds the ship together. And of course, what is this an allusion to? Anybody remember that joke?
If you unscrew your navel in your ass.
Right, exactly. It's a Shaggy Dog story about somebody who wants the answer and goes here and there and elsewhere. And finally he gets the answer, which is that if you unscrew the navel, that your ass falls off, that the ship would fall apart, that what each man sees in that doubloon as a justification for the pursuit of the whale is the kind of glue which unites them as a society. What time is it now? Okay, I got a few more. I also want to call your attention to Town Ho's story, because it's, I think, a key to the book and to the nature of rebellion, and the fact that men are so designed that no one is perfect, and that there are animosities which animate us for no good reason. And there is this fight between Steelkilt and Radney, which looks ahead, as I said before, to the fight between Billy Budd and Claggart. There's also a foreshadowing of what happens with Ahab. And Steelkilt, who was from the Great Lakes, that reference to an interiority of man's situation. Steelkilt will not stand Radney. And when Radney insults his dignity and says, "You will sweep the deck," and Steelkilt says, "I'm exhausted," what we have are two interpretations of the same fact. It may be meaningless to sweep the deck at this time, but authority has told you to do it. And if you don't do it, you risk the unity of the boat. And what happens, of course, is that Steelkilt is condemned, as it were, to this tomb, and from which he finally he will arise and challenge, or is by an act of God, is kept from challenging the authority, which would doom the boat. Okay, reference to the cannibalism of the sea, which is a reflection also of the cannibalism of men. Men are referred to as sharks. You know, look at those sharks that we see in the water fighting for those bloody remains of a whale or a horse or whatever. That's like human beings in our competition. And when we have the reflection upon it, you know, by the savage who looks upon it through different eyes, and he says, whoever created the shark is one damn engine. And who created the shark, of course, is God. So why has God created man in that cannibalistic mode? Okay, let's see, what else do I have here? I've scheduled a third meeting. And I was wondering if we might take up the ending of the book at that third meeting. Does that put anybody at a disadvantage in 2 weeks, November 1st? There's a few more things I'd like to point out, but it would take me a little longer than the 5 minutes I have left. And we really should concentrate on what the meaning is of the ending of the novel. And I hope I'll have more wind in my sails when we meet again in 2 weeks. Is that okay? All right. Hey, listen, thank you for putting up with everything, all the disadvantages, my problems, technology's problems. You've been great. I know I love you all. Thank you. Okay.